November 24, 1944. 5:15 a.m. Airspace east of Tokyo. The horizon is still black, a thin whisper of gray barely rising over the Pacific. Below, Japan sleeps under a blanket of cold winter haze. But high above the islands, at nearly 31,000 feet, a sound begins to grow. A deep, distant rumble. Not thunder. Not engines Japan recognizes. It is the sound of something new. Inside the lead aircraft, B-29 Superfortress number 42 to 24,592, pilot Major Robert Morgan grips the yoke with gloved hands. Frost clings to the inside of the cockpit windows. His co-pilot calls out airspeed, oxygen levels, course corrections, his voice steady, but his eyes flicking to the altimeter again and again. Because this morning, the crew is flying from an island the Japanese High Command was certain the Americans could never use. Saipan. Weeks earlier, Japanese planners had dismissed the possibility that the United States could turn the Marianas into a functioning launch point for strategic bombing. The islands were too far from supply routes, too small, too exposed to counterattack. Even if captured, Tokyo believed it would take years before the Americans could build airfields large enough to support heavy bombers. But now, in the frigid darkness over Tokyo, the impossible hums across the sky in perfect formation. Inside the aircraft, the crew moves with methodical precision. Navigator Lieutenant James Howard leans over his charts, checking drift against the rising winds. The bomb bay doors rattle in the slipstream. Every breath forms ice crystals that drift toward the floor vents. Below, on the ground, a very different scene unfolds. Inside the Eastern Defense Command bunker in Ibaraki Prefecture, Lieutenant Colonel Hiroshi Nakamura, an intelligence officer, jolts upright as the alarm phones begin screaming. Operators shout over one another as static-filled radio reports pour in. Unidentified aircraft approaching from the southeast, altitude unknown. Possible large formation, repeat, large formation. No engines heard, no visual confirmation. Nakamura pushes his glasses up his nose, heart hammering. This cannot be right. Just days earlier, reports insisted the American foothold in the Marianas was still unstable, that their repair and supply capacity was limited, that the runways were too short for anything more than small reconnaissance flights. Yet something enormous is moving toward Tokyo. He barks for updates, but the radar stations along the coast are confused, echoes are faint, intermittent, high-altitude shadows slipping across screens never designed for aircraft of this size or speed. Back in the sky, the B-29's tighten formation. The sunrise begins as a pale red wound across the world's edge. The bombardier, Captain William Dorsey, adjusts the Norden bomb sight. His hands tremble, not from fear, but from cold. "We're almost there," he mutters into his mask. Japan's not gonna believe this. And below them, they don't. Japanese commanders had measured American industrial capability, but they had measured wrong. They had calculated American logistics, but miscalculated everything. They had assessed the limits of U.S. bomber technology, but those limits no longer existed. And now, in the dawn light, the first wave of 111 B-29 Superfortresses crosses the coastline of Japan, silently at first, then with a roar that shakes tiles from rooftops. The observers on the coast stare upward in disbelief. Some whisper. Some freeze. One officer drops his binoculars entirely. Because this is the moment Japan realizes something terrible. Saipan was secure. The Americans had built their airfields in record time. And the B-29s were not coming in small numbers. They were coming nonstop. The sky begins to glitter as bomb bay doors open. Inside the bunker, Nakamura whispers the words no one wants to hear. They're coming from the Marianas. The islands are operational. The room falls silent. And then the bombs begin to fall. The first explosions ripple through the industrial districts east of Tokyo, dull flashes muffled by altitude, followed by rolling thunder that travels across neighborhoods still wrapped in early morning fog. At 31,000 feet, Major Morgan's aircraft shudders as the shockwaves reach them, a faint vibration felt through the aluminum skin. The formation holds steady. Below, the chaos is immediate. Fire crews stumble from their stations, still pulling on boots. Anti-aircraft gunners sprint to their emplacements, shouting as they swing the long black barrels of Type 88 guns toward the sky. But the B-29 sit far above their effective range, gliding over Tokyo like silent, silver ghosts. In the bunker, Lieutenant Colonel Hiroshi Nakamura grips the edge of the plotting table. "How many?" he demands. The radar officer swallows hard. "Sir, dozens. Possibly over 100. "That's impossible," someone mutters. Nakamura hears the tremor in their voices. They're not denying the report, they're denying what it means. Because Japanese intelligence had been certain, if Saipan ever fell, the Americans would need at least 6 months to repair the runways. It would take another 6 for supply lines, fuel depots, spare parts, and maintenance hangars. The B-29 was a massive aircraft, temperamental, experimental, plagued with engine issues. Tokyo believed it could not operate reliably from a remote island chain thousands of miles from the U.S. mainland. And yet here they are. The operators stiffen as more reports come in. Second wave approaching Tokyo Bay. New heading, possible diversion toward Nagoya. Enemy altitude remains above 30,000 feet. No one can comprehend how the Americans had turned Saipan from a battlefield of shattered coral and smoking craters into a fully functioning superbase in just weeks. How they had extended runways, dredged harbors, assembled hangars, and filled entire shorelines with fuel tanks. How hundreds of B-29s, each the size of a small ship, arrived in a continuous stream. But Major Morgan can explain it with a single glance over his shoulder. Behind him stretches an endless line of superfortresses, dozens of gleaming wings catching the first rays of sunlight. Engines drone in perfect mechanical rhythm, a sound like steel breathing. Months of preparation. Tens of thousands of engineers. Millions of tons of equipment. An industrial power unmatched in history. As the bombardment continues, flames rise over Tokyo's eastern wards. Paper houses ignite like kindling. Warehouses crumble. The docks burn so intensely that even from 30,000 feet, faint orange reflections lick the undersides of the B-29s. Navigator Lieutenant Howard marks the moment. "Target complete," he says quietly. Back on the ground, Nakamura freezes as a messenger rushes into the room, salutes, then delivers a single sheet of intercepted American radio chatter. He reads it once. Then again. "This is the first. More raids expected regularly." The words land like a hammer. Not a one-time strike. Not a temporary demonstration. A campaign. A relentless one. Nakamura's superior, General Hideki Takeuchi, storms into the operations room, demanding explanations, how the Americans had supplied these aircraft, how they repaired them, how they reached Japan with such ease. Nakamura forces the truth out through clenched teeth. "General, they must have built the airfields on Saipan faster than we believed possible." Takeuchi stares at him, face pale. "But the construction requirements were underestimated," Nakamura says. And the B-29's range was underestimated. And America's ability to deliver logistics. Another silence. Finally, the general whispers, "Everything was underestimated." Outside the bunker, air raid sirens echo through Tokyo, rising and falling like a mechanical scream. High above, in the thin blue light of the upper atmosphere, Major Morgan checks his fuel levels. The crew begins the slow, careful turn back toward the Marianas. The aircraft groans under the stress of the maneuver. One engine coughs, flames briefly spurting before stabilizing. Dorsey, the bombardier, exhales. Japan's awake now. Morgan nods. But he knows this raid is only the beginning. On Saipan, engineers are already lengthening runways. More B-29 groups arrive every week. The U.S. has the fuel, the spare parts, the trained crews, the ships, the factories, and the will. Japan's leadership, still clinging to doctrine and outdated assumptions, is only now realizing the scale of what's coming. They had once believed the Marianas too distant to matter. A set of islands impossible to transform into a forward base. A logistical fantasy. But in the cold dawn over Tokyo, as the B-29s disappear into the rising sun, the truth becomes undeniable. The Marianas are now the gateway to the destruction of Japan's war industry. And the Americans have only just begun to use it. June 1944. Northern Saipan. The island still smells of gunpowder and burned palm fronds. Smoke drifts from shattered ridgelines where days earlier, U.S. Marines had fought inch by inch against entrenched Japanese defenders. The coral ground is torn open, littered with twisted metal, uprooted trees, and abandoned fortifications. And into this ruined landscape march the men who will change the course of the war, not infantry, not tank crews, but engineers. The first Seabees arrive before the echoes of battle have even faded. Bulldozers roll off landing craft like armored beasts, their steel blades caked with salt water. Trucks, cranes, generators, and entire prefabricated buildings follow. Lieutenant Commander Harold Hank Lewis, leader of the 121st Naval Construction Battalion, steps onto the beach and scans the terrain. His men wait for orders, sweat already glistening in the heat. He points toward the shattered Japanese airstrip in the distance. "Gentlemen, that's our new home. And in 3 weeks, B-29s are going to take off from it." A few men laugh, nervously. The strip is nothing but rubble and bomb craters. But Lewis doesn't blink. Because American planners know something Japan refuses to believe, the United States can move an entire industrial world across the ocean. 2 days later. Saipan shakes with the roar of diesel engines. Bulldozers carve through coral like it's soft earth. Explosives crack through the afternoon air as engineers blast open new runway space. Dump trucks form a constant caravan between the beach and the construction zone, hauling crushed coral used to pave the new runway foundation. Seabee Ernest Malloy wipes grease from his brow and mutters to his partner, "Feels like we're building a city in the middle of a war." His partner grins. "We are." They work under the watchful eye of Marines still clearing pockets of resistance in the hills. Japanese snipers occasionally fire from caves. Mortar shells whistle down at unpredictable hours. Yet the construction doesn't stop, not for weather, not for enemy fire, not even for fatigue. By the end of the first week, the skeleton of a massive air base takes shape. Meanwhile, 1,500 miles away in Tokyo, Lieutenant Colonel Nakamura studies aerial reconnaissance photographs in disbelief. The images show long new scars across Saipan's northern plain, runways being extended twice their original size, construction zones expanding every day. "This can't be right," one officer argues. "The Americans cannot move heavy bombers there so quickly. It's months too soon." But Nakamura has seen enough. "They are not waiting for perfect conditions," he says. "They are building while under fire." Japan had assumed American engineers would need calm rear areas, wide spaces, secure coasts, and endless supplies. But the United States is proving something far more dangerous. They can build under chaos. Back on Saipan, the first B-29 air crews arrive. They step off their C-54 transports and stare at the controlled frenzy around them, survey teams marking flight paths, cranes lifting steel beams, fuel tanks rising like giant white domes, and maintenance shops forming from prefabricated kits. Major Robert Morgan, newly arrived from the training fields in Kansas, runs his hand along the wooden frame of a half-finished hangar. "You're telling me we'll be flying from here in a month?" he asks. Lieutenant Commander Lewis smiles grimly. "Try 2 weeks." The urgency is palpable. Every nail hammered, every bulldozer track, every fuel line laid is a strike against Japan's war capacity. The crews begin practicing takeoff runs on partially completed runways, engines thundering, crews shouting over the noise, the ground vibrating under 60 tons of steel. Engineers throw themselves to the ground when Japanese artillery shells land nearby, then stand up and keep working. A mortar blast dents a crane, the operator curses, wipes blood from his cheek, and starts the engine again. By late July, the transformation is staggering. A 7,000-foot runway, finished. A second strip, nearing completion. Fuel farms, established. repair hangars, operational. Anti-aircraft defenses, installed. Barracks, command posts, and supply depots, rising like a new city. Every day, the island changes from battlefield to superbase. And still, Tokyo refuses to admit what's happening. On the night the first B-29 lands on Saipan, its wheels kicking up coral dust as it rolls to a stop, a group of Japanese officers on the mainland studies a final intelligence report. American airbase construction appears more advanced than expected. Nakamura slams his fist onto the table. Stop calling it advanced. Call it what it is. The room goes silent. A strategic disaster. He is the first to put into words what every officer fears. If the Marianas are operational, Japan is no longer fighting a distant enemy. The enemy is now within striking distance of Tokyo itself. The sound of hammers on Saipan echoes across the Pacific, like a countdown no one in Japan is prepared for. November 1944. Saipan, Isley Field. Floodlights cast long geometric shadows across the coral runway as ground crews swarm around the waiting B-29s. The night air is thick with humidity, engine oil, and exhaust. Each bomber looms like a mechanical giant, its wings stretching so wide they seem to blot out the stars. Major Robert Morgan walks beneath the fuselage of his B-29, running gloved fingers over the cool metal. The engines tick as they warm. He can feel the vibration of the propellers through the soles of his boots. Crew Chief Master Sergeant Paul Grimes meets him at the nose wheel. She's ready, sir. Fuel tanks full. Engines checked twice. Bomb load secured. Morgan nods. Good. Tonight, we make history. Across the field, dozens of other crews perform the same ritual, checking instruments, loading ammunition, tightening oxygen masks, inspecting fire extinguishers. The runway lights flicker as generators strain under demand. Far to the east, thunderheads rumble over the Pacific. But they won't stop what's coming. Inside the operations tent, Colonel Raymond O. Wilson addresses the assembled pilots. His voice is low, steady. This is the first major strike on Tokyo from the Marianas. Japan does not believe we can reach them. They do not believe we can sustain operations. Tonight, you will correct their assumptions. Maps rustle. Pens scratch. No one speaks. This is not a demonstration, Wilson adds. It is the beginning of a campaign. A murmur passes through the tent, equal parts excitement and dread. Because every man in the room knows this truth. Once the first bomb falls, Japan will understand that the United States now has a direct highway to the heart of the empire. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, Lieutenant Colonel Nakamura tries to steady his breathing. He has just received another report, photographs showing the full length of Saipan's runways, the new fuel tanks, the parking aprons filled with bombers. The number of B-29s on the ground appears to increase each week. It still makes no sense, says Captain Matsuo, standing beside him. The distance, the difficulty of maintaining aircraft that large, even with their industry. Nakamura cuts him off sharply. You're thinking like it's 1938. The Americans are not fighting the old war. He holds up the reconnaissance image, a forest of aircraft lined up wingtip to wingtip. They are fighting a new one. Behind him, officers keep comparing estimates, calculating fuel capacity, assessing American supply shipments. Their charts still insist the Americans cannot launch more than a handful of long-range missions per month. But Nakamura knows the charts are wrong. They were wrong weeks ago. Because American industry doesn't trickle. It flows. Back on Saipan, the engines of 111 B-29s roar to life in sequence. The field glows white with propeller wash and swirling dust. Morgan climbs into his seat, adjusts the harness, and performs his final checks. Crew ready, he calls. Navigator ready. Bombardier ready. Radio operator ready. Tail gunner ready. Ready in the blister. Ready in the tunnel. Morgan gives a short nod. Then let's fly. The first bomber lurches forward, tires screeching as they grip the coral runway. One by one, the aircraft rise into the gauzy night, their navigation lights blinking as they climb into formation. From the ground, the sound is deafening, a rolling storm that seems to pull itself into the sky. Hours later, approaching Japan. The coastline appears as a faint silver line beneath the moon. Forests and villages lie quiet. The cities are dark, blackout curtains drawn tight. But the Japanese early warning system, already strained by fuel shortages and radar blind spots, misses most of the incoming formation. A few operators pick up faint traces, but the signals flicker, unstable at that altitude. In the Eastern Defense Command bunker, an officer hesitates before reporting. Possible incoming aircraft, altitude extremely high. Could be weather echoes. Or American reconnaissance, another officer suggests. No one imagines the truth. A wave of heavy bombers is minutes away. Then the bombs fall. Explosions ripple across factory districts. Warehouses ignite. Rail junctions vanish in fire and debris. The shockwaves tear through quiet neighborhoods, rattling windows miles away. Inside the bunker, Nakamura hears the rumble through the earth itself. His hands tremble around the telephone receiver. How many aircraft? General Takeuchi demands. Nakamura forces himself to answer. Initial reports suggest more than 100. Takeuchi's face drains of color. That cannot be correct. Nakamura's voice cracks, the weight of realization finally crushing him. General, they are launching from the Marianas. The airfields are fully operational. He sets the receiver down with a shaking hand. Because this is the moment Japanese leadership understands the magnitude of their mistake. They had assumed Saipan was too far, too small, too costly, too exposed. They were wrong on every count. And as Tokyo burns beneath the first wave, a darker truth settles over the room. If the Americans can do this once, they can do it every night. December 1944, Tokyo. Snow falls in thin, drifting sheets over the Imperial Palace grounds. The city still smells of smoke from the previous raids, burned timber, scorched metal, and the sickening tang of melted wiring. Entire blocks remain blackened, twisted shapes of what once were homes, factories, rail depots. Inside a reinforced conference chamber deep within the Army Ministry, Japan's top commanders gather around a long polished table. The lamps cast harsh shadows over their faces, fatigue, disbelief, and something far more dangerous, uncertainty. General Takeuchi leans forward, tapping his knuckles on the table to silence the room. Reports confirm another raid forming from Saipan. Possibly Tinian as well. Murmurs ripple. Every man present understands the implications. More B-29s. More fuel. More bombs. More destruction. But what none of them yet understand, what still refuses to settle into their bones, is that America's industrial machine has now locked them into a cycle of strikes Japan cannot possibly interrupt. Lieutenant Colonel Nakamura stands at the end of the table, his shoulders tight. He unrolls a reconnaissance map showing the Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, all marked with thick black outlines indicating new runways. The Americans are expanding faster than our analysts predicted, he says. In November we counted roughly 130 operational superfortresses. As of last week, that number appears closer to 200. General Takeuchi frowns. Your estimates keep increasing. Nakamura meets his gaze. Because their numbers keep increasing. A stunned quiet follows. Japan doesn't have the aviation fuel to keep its fighter wings airborne, much less intercept bombers flying at 30,000 feet. Radar stations are stretched thin, forced to ration electricity. Anti-aircraft batteries are running short on ammunition. Meanwhile, halfway across the Pacific. On Saipan, early morning. A pale orange sun rises over the island, revealing a military landscape that did not exist 6 months earlier. Rows of B-29s glisten with dew. Mechanics in oil-stained uniforms climb over wings, replacing spark plugs, patching bullet holes, aligning bomb racks. Forklifts deliver crates of spark plugs, engines, hydraulic lines, oxygen tanks. Fuel crews connect hoses to underground storage tanks, massive reserves brought by convoys of tanker ships. Major Morgan sits on a wooden crate near his bomber, drinking bitter coffee. His radio operator, Sergeant Lloyd Barrett, jogs over with the morning briefing. Tokyo rail yards hit hard, Barrett reports. Intel says the fires burned all night. Morgan nods slowly. And we're going back? Afternoon takeoff. Another industrial target. Morgan sighs, rubbing his eyes. The fatigue never really goes away, not for the crews, not for the ground teams, not for the engineers still expanding airfields even as the bombers use them. But that's the point. That's the pressure America can apply. Continuous operations. Relentless tempo. A weight Japan cannot push back against. Morgan stands, stretching out the stiffness in his shoulders. Let's get ready, then. Back in Tokyo, the War Ministry receives another update, this time from naval observers in the Central Pacific. American convoys continue delivering construction supplies. Estimated thousands of tons arriving weekly. Fuel reserves in the Marianas appear unlimited. The admiral reading the report looks up in disbelief. Unlimited? That cannot be correct. Nakamura corrects him quietly. Not unlimited, sir. Just more than we can ever counter. Paper screens rattle as the winter wind pushes against the building. Outside, children walk past burned-out trolley cars. Workers shovel debris from roads. Civil defense volunteers stack sandbags in front of schools. Tokyo, a city that once believed itself untouchable, now watches the sky with dread, every day, every night. December 13, 1944, the next raid. From Saipan and Tinian, 120 B-29s rise into the sky once again. Major Morgan's aircraft lifts off the runway, engines thundering in synchronized power. The mission is long, cold, and grueling. High-altitude winds buffet the formation. Turbulence shakes the crew until their teeth rattle. At 29,000 feet, the oxygen masks freeze from the inside. Crewmen stamp their boots to keep feeling in their toes. Engine temperatures creep toward the red. Yet the formation holds. Below them, Japan's coast appears, faint, jagged, half-hidden under clouds. But the target stands out clearly once the bombardiers peer through the northern sights, a sprawling industrial complex responsible for producing aircraft components. Bombardier Captain Dorsey murmurs into his mask, "Steady, steady, bombs away." The aircraft shudders as the payload drops. Explosions bloom across the facility below, white flashes, then columns of smoke that rise like twisting black towers. Secondary fires detonate as fuel stores ignite. Morgan pulls the aircraft gently upward, beginning the long return journey. This is becoming a routine, Barrett mutters. Morgan glances at him. For us. Not for Japan. In Tokyo, the sirens wail again. Nakamura watches the flames from a rooftop as columns of smoke rise into the afternoon sky. He grips the railing, knuckles white. When General Takeuchi joins him moments later, he speaks without turning. We cannot stop them. Takeuchi exhales slowly. We must find a way. There is no way, Nakamura says softly. The Marianas give them reach. Their factories give them numbers. And our analysts were wrong about all of it. He finally looks at the general, eyes haunted. This is not a series of raids, this is the new reality. They will come whenever they choose. And we cannot make them stop. The general closes his eyes as the fires burn below them, a city caught in the gears of a machine too vast to fight. Because the truth is now undeniable. Japan is no longer preparing for an attack. It is living under one. January 1945, Imperial General Headquarters, Tokyo. The corridors are cold, dim, and silent except for hurried footsteps echoing between the stone walls. Officers clutch binders, maps, casualty reports, documents that seem to grow heavier by the day. The air itself carries tension, as if the building knows the gravity of the decisions being made inside. In a heavily guarded strategy chamber, Japan's highest military leaders gather around a large situation board. The map of the Pacific dominates the wall. The Marianas sit in the center, small dots in a vast blue sea, yet now the most important pieces on the board. General Hideki Takeuchi presses a trembling hand against the table. Begin the briefing. Lieutenant Colonel Nakamura steps forward, holding a new intelligence report, the kind that no longer surprises him, yet still terrifies everyone else. Gentlemen, he begins, as of this morning, U.S. airbases on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam have completed further expansions. New runways, more fuel depots, reinforced maintenance hangars. He takes a deep breath. And the arrival of additional B-29 groups. A murmur spreads through the room. Someone whispers, "More?" Another officer shakes his head in disbelief. Nakamura continues. The Americans now appear capable of launching multiple raids per day if they choose. Weather remains their primary limiting factor, not aircraft, not fuel, not logistics. Silence. Every man in the room knows what this means. The American bombing threat is no longer episodic. No longer dependent on rare opportunities. No longer a question of if. It is now a permanent force. A constant pressure. A boot on the throat of the Japanese mainland. Meanwhile, Saipan, Isley Field. The air is filled with the metallic clatter of tools, the steady thrum of auxiliary power units, and the muffled roar of B-29 engines being tested all at once. The sun climbs over the horizon, illuminating an island transformed into a fortress of aviation. Ground crews move with practiced speed, checking hydraulic lines, repairing tail gun mounts, replacing spark plugs still warm from the previous night's mission. New crews arrive daily, flown in from the States. Fresh supplies fill the warehouses. Replacement parts are stacked in towering piles. Everywhere Major Morgan walks, he sees motion. Determination. Efficiency. Even exhaustion cannot slow the machine. Sergeant Lloyd Barrett jogs over with a clipboard. Orders from command. New target assigned. Morgan raises an eyebrow. Another? Yes, sir. They want us airborne before sunset. Morgan looks across the airfield, at the engineers still leveling ground for yet another runway. At mechanics wiping grease from their hands as they hurry toward another aircraft. At pilots who haven't slept properly in 3 days. And he realizes something. America intended this. Designed it. Planned for it. A sustainable, unbreakable bombing pipeline stretching from Kansas to the Pacific. Back in Tokyo, Nakamura pins new markers onto the situation map. Red pins for cities already bombed. Yellow for those at risk. Blue for industrial complexes too vital to lose. But there is a problem. The red is spreading faster than the intelligence officers can update it. General Takeuchi sits heavily in his chair. Our anti-aircraft units report shortages in ammunition. Fuel is rationed. Pilot losses are unsustainable. What do our analysts recommend? The room waits for Nakamura's answer. He hesitates. Then he speaks the words no one wants to hear. There is no countermeasure. The general's jaw tightens. There must be something. If we had fuel, Nakamura says quietly, if we had spare parts, if our radar network were modern, if our fighter aircraft could reach their altitude, if we had pilots left to train, then perhaps. He spreads his hands helplessly. But we do not have these things. We cannot intercept. We cannot strike back. We cannot relocate industry fast enough. We cannot build shelters strong enough. He points to the Marianas. We cannot stop the B-29s from coming. A young officer slams his fist onto the table. Then what do we fight with? Nakamura looks at him with empty eyes. Hope, and whatever remains. January 23, 1945, Japan's strategic collapse begins. The next raid comes at dusk. The next one before dawn. Then one in the afternoon. Japanese civilians huddle in bomb shelters listening to the endless drone in the sky, each time wondering if it's another wave, another target, another night of fires that blot out the stars. Factories stop production for days at a time. Rail networks break down. Communications falter. Entire districts vanish under the weight of incendiaries. Japan's war machine begins to fracture. And in General Headquarters, even the most hardened officers finally understand what the early intelligence failures have cost them. They had not simply misjudged American capability. They had misjudged American speed, scale, and resolve. The B-29 was never a weapon Japan could resist. Not from the Marianas. Not with the economy they had left. Not with the skies now belonging entirely to the enemy. The war had shifted. And Japan was now fighting on borrowed time. December 18, 1944. Tokyo, Imperial General Headquarters. The lamps flicker as another tremor rolls beneath the concrete floor. It's not an earthquake. Everyone in the underground command room knows the difference now. General Ikawa stiffens as the muffled thud reaches them, a deep, distant boom traveling through miles of city and soil. A rack of teacups rattles on a nearby table. A junior officer instinctively reaches for his cap, even though they're dozens of meters underground. A communications lieutenant sprints into the chamber, headset still around his neck, breath fogging in the cold bunker air. Sirs, multiple impacts across the wards of Kodo, Shinagawa, and Chiba. Fires already visible from rooftop observers. General Ikawa steadies himself on the edge of the strategy table. His knuckles whiten. He knows what's coming next. Another officer at the far end of the room shouts over the noise of rustling papers and clattering telephones. More B-29s approaching from the southeast. Altitude estimates, 8 to 10,000 meters. A second tremor ripples under their feet, closer this time. Dust drifts from a seam in the ceiling. For months, Tokyo believed the B-29 raids would be occasional, limited, costly to the enemy. Japanese planners expected maybe one raid every few weeks. Maybe fewer, if American logistics faltered like they predicted. Instead, the raids are growing. Expanding. Tightening like a steel vise. And tonight, the truth is sinking in. A map on the central table is covered in colored pins, red marks for bombing routes, blue for presumed takeoff points. Officers often shuffled the pins, unsure of their accuracy. For weeks, they believed the Americans were launching from China, barely scraping by unlimited supplies. But the patterns are different now. The timings are precise. The formations are larger. The altitude is higher. The tonnage, far greater. Something changed. And everyone in the chamber knows what it is, even if no one dares say it aloud. Saipan. Tinian. Guam. The Marianas are no longer theoretical threats. They are fully operational air fortresses. General Ikawa finally forces the words out through clenched teeth. They're flying from the Marianas. Regularly. Easily. And they are not stopping. Silence spreads through the bunker, broken only by the distant echo of another blast above the capital. A staff officer flips open a notebook, his fingers trembling. Sir, intelligence believed the enemy would require months to build functioning runways. We predicted prolonged tropical storms, coral limitations, fuel shortages. Predicted incorrectly, Ikawa snaps. He turns to the operations board, thick with chalk markings, flight paths, and annotations from every recent raid. There's no denying it anymore. The Americans have carved vast airfields into jungle and coral in record time, transforming the Marianas into launch pads for annihilation. And the Japanese commanders, confident in their assessment, never prepared for this speed. A low rumble shakes the room once more. But this one isn't from the bombs. It's the sound of Japanese staff officers arguing, quietly at first, then louder, more desperate. Whispers become accusations. Accusations ignite into panic. Why didn't we reinforce Saipan sooner? Why were the defensive plans ignored? Why didn't the Navy stop the invasion fleet? Why didn't we anticipate American industrial speed? Why did we believe they could not sustain long-range raids? General Ikawa slams his fist onto the table. The room falls silent again. Gentlemen, this is not the time for blame. The Americans have achieved what we believed impossible. He gestures toward the ceiling, the burning city above their heads. Japan is now within daily range of their bombers. Each hour we delay, the fires rise higher. Our people suffer. Our factories die. And our empire shrinks. A harsh buzz interrupts him, another incoming report. An aide reads it with a tightening jaw. Sir, the first major industrial complex in eastern Tokyo has been hit. Fire brigades are overwhelmed. Additional B-29 waves detected. Estimated time to target, 14 minutes. 14 minutes. In that time, half the city could be aflame. The officers look to General Ikawa, some searching for instructions, others for reassurance. He offers neither. Instead, he stares at the illuminated map of Japan. The glowing outline suddenly feels small. Vulnerable. Finite. The Americans have done what their intelligence insisted was unrealistic. They built a direct bridge of fire from the Pacific to the Japanese homeland. And now that the B-29s can come at will, the meaning is clear. Japan is no longer fighting a distant war. The war has arrived at its doorstep. And it will not leave. Outside, another impact thunders across Tokyo, shaking dust from the bunker rafters. General Ikawa exhales, long, slow, defeated. This is only the beginning. December 22, 1944. Tinian Island, Northern Marianas. North Field. The sun hasn't risen yet, but the entire airfield is already alive with motion. Floodlights cast long silver beams across the tarmac, revealing row after row of B-29 superfortresses, massive, gleaming machines lined up with mathematical precision. Their propellers idle in slow rotations, sending warm spirals of exhaust drifting across the humid island air. Ground crews hustle beneath the wings with practiced rhythm. Fuel lines hiss. Tools clatter. Bomb-loading trucks rumble from aircraft to aircraft. Dozens of men move under the giant fuselages like ants around behemoths. And above it all, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Bob Morgan surveys the scene from the edge of the runway, clipboard tucked beneath one arm, goggles pushed up onto his forehead. We go in tight formation today. Keep altitude high. Tokyo's still reeling from last week. We're not giving them time to breathe. His voice is steady, firm, confident, not because he underestimates the enemy, but because he knows what this place has become. The most powerful airbase in the world. Behind him, Northfield stretches nearly 2 miles long, flattened coral, steel matting, fuel depots, massive maintenance hangars. A second runway lies beyond it. A third is under construction. Tinian has transformed from a jungle-covered island into the largest single air operations center humanity has ever built. All in a matter of weeks. The scale would seem impossible to anyone who hadn't seen American engineers work. Morgan glances at his watch. 0420 hours. A jeep rolls to a stop next to him. Colonel Jack Dillon steps out, cigarette dangling from his lips. You ready to wake Tokyo again? He mutters. Morgan smirks. I think they're still awake from last time. Dillon nods toward the horizon, where the silhouettes of Saipan and Guam glow faintly under the early morning sky. Hell of a thought, isn't it? Dillon says quietly. 3 islands that most Americans had never heard of a year ago, now launching more airpower than Britain, Germany, and Japan combined. Morgan doesn't answer. He doesn't need to. Because even from here, standing on coral rock, sweat clinging to his neck, he can feel the scale of what they've built. A logistical engine so massive it hums like a living thing. Behind them, another B-29 roars to life, engines thundering. The ground beneath their boots trembles. Meanwhile, 1,500 miles away. Tokyo. An air raid siren wails again, its cry thin, exhausted, defeated. Coal-black smoke drifts over the city like storm clouds. Charred wooden homes still smolder from the previous night's fires. Civilians shovel debris from shattered streets. Fire brigades rest their heads on hoses, too tired to do anything but breathe. Military police direct foot traffic around craters the size of swimming pools. Inside an emergency government office, Army Minister General Anami leans over a stack of damage reports, unable to hide the tremor in his hands. Another 30 B-29s detected over the Pacific. Possibly more behind them. He doesn't respond. Someone else asks, "Do we scramble what fighters we have left?" A different officer answers, "We scrambled everything yesterday." Silence. Everyone knows they're outmatched. The B-29 flies higher than most Japanese fighters can reach. Even when one is hit, it often limps home. Japan's aircraft industry is collapsing under a lack of aluminum, fuel, and trained pilots. But the worst part, the part gnawing at every officer present, is not the damage. Not the fires. Not the casualties. It's the realization that this will not stop. Not next week. Not next month. Not until Japan is ashes or surrendered. Back on Tinian. Morgan climbs the ladder into the cockpit of his superfortress, the fickle Franny. The crew is already inside, navigators checking charts, gunners adjusting turrets, the radio operator tapping out check messages. He settles into the pilot's seat. The headset cracks to life. All groups, prepare for takeoff. Target, industrial districts, Tokyo area. Estimated flight time, 6 hours. Good hunting. Morgan gives a slow, deliberate exhale. All right boys, let's get this bird in the air. The engines roar. The entire aircraft shudders. Northfield vibrates beneath the wheels. Ahead of him, dozens of other B-29s taxi into position, forming a long metallic river leading toward the open Pacific sky. One bomber after another lifts off, huge, silver wings rising above the island. The sound is thunder. Literal thunder. If you were standing on Tinian's cliffs, watching the silhouettes disappear eastward, you would understand what Japanese commanders feared most. This is not a raid. This is a production line of destruction. And it's accelerating. Morgan pulls back on the yoke. The fickle Franny climbs, steady and powerful, engines humming in perfect harmony. Below him, the island shrinks to a speck. Ahead of him, Japan waits again. He leans forward, eyes fixed on the horizon. Second round, Tokyo, he mutters. Let's see if you're awake. December 22nd, 1944. Tokyo, 11:47 a.m. The fires have been burning for hours. Columns of smoke drift upward in towering plumes, turning the winter sky into a brown, swirling haze. Fire brigades drag hoses through alleys that were once neighborhoods. Civilians form bucket lines, passing water hand to hand, each movement slow and desperate. Police whistles shriek. Children cry. Somewhere in the distance, a temple bell rings, warped by heat, echoing across ruined blocks. Inside a half-collapsed government radio station, engineers try to steady antenna masts while ash falls like snow. The entire room smells of burned paper. Major Sasaki wipes the grit from his face and leans toward the steel-reinforced window. In the far distance, tiny glints catch the sun, like faint silver needles drifting across the sky. B-29s. Still here. Still overhead. Still attacking. Sasaki swallows hard. How many passes have they made today? A young signal officer replies, his voice cracking. 3. Maybe 4. Hard to tell, some formations split. And our fighters? Haven't seen one in over an hour, sir. Sasaki turns away from the window, shoulders drooping, exhaustion carved into the lines of his face. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Japan's high command had believed, confidently, that the Americans would require months to prepare real operations from the Marianas. They expected disease, jungle terrain, coral dust, storms, and supply failures to cripple the U.S. effort. They expected construction delays. They expected engine problems. They expected American logistical limits. But what they got was something else entirely. A constant, unbroken stream of bombers so large and advanced that Japanese planners struggled to comprehend their scale. Meanwhile, 27,000 feet above Tokyo, the fickle Franny banks gently left, sliding into a wide turn above the smoking city. Morgan watches through the cockpit canopy as skyscraper shadows ripple through the haze below. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Harris, peers down with narrowed eyes. Looks worse than last time, Harris mutters. Morgan nods silently. He's not celebrating. No one up here is. War from the air is detached, clinical, distant, until the smoke rises high enough to stain the sky. Until you see the scale. Until you understand how small a city looks from this altitude, and how quickly it can burn. The intercom crackles. Bombardier to pilot, drop complete. Good dispersion. Targets hit. Morgan steadies the aircraft as turbulence rattles through the fuselage. Dozens of other B-29s arc through the same turn, silver birds carving perfect paths through a sky thick with smoke. Below them, anti-aircraft bursts try to reach their altitude, tiny black puffs exploding far beneath them. Too low, Harris says, shaking his head. They can't reach us. Not anymore, Morgan replies. The B-29 was built for this altitude, pressurized cabins, Wright R-3350 engines, wing loading optimized for high flight. Up here, Japan's anti-aircraft guns are nearly useless. Tokyo, Imperial General Headquarters, 12:03 p.m. General Ikawa places a trembling hand on a map cluttered with markers. Smoke from above-ground fires seeps faintly into the ventilation ducts, bringing a sickly smell into the bunker. He can hear faint thumps through the concrete walls, like distant drums. Each one marks another strike. Deputy Chief of Operations Colonel Maguro reads the latest report aloud. Multiple districts ablaze. Civilian evacuation routes overloaded. Railroad movement halted. Factories in southern Tokyo no longer operational. Estimated strike force, 80 to 100 B-29s. More detected in the southeast. Oikawa closes his eyes. Japan's industrial heart is being dissected one air raid at a time. Do we know how many bombers the Americans have on Saipan and Tinian now? He asks. Maguro hesitates. Sir, the latest intelligence estimates over 200 operational, possibly more. A quiet gasp spreads through the room before anyone can hide it. Including Guam operations, Maguro continues, total potential sortie capacity could exceed. Stop, Oikawa snarls, slamming a fist onto the table. He doesn't want the number. He already knows it's higher than anything Japan can interrupt, let alone stop. He turns to the officers beside him. Gentlemen, we miscalculated the Americans. We underestimated their industry, completely. And now our cities will pay the price. Above the Pacific, returning to base. Morgan watches Japan slip beneath the cloud line as fickle Franny banks south, joining the long trail of returning aircraft. The crew is silent. Not from fear. Not from fatigue. But from the sobering reality of what they witnessed. A war at this scale is heavy, even from 27,000 feet. The ocean glistens ahead, vast, endless blue stretching to the horizon. Somewhere beyond that line, Tinian waits. Fuel depots. Hangars. Runways being expanded. Tools working through the night. And tomorrow, another mission. And the day after, another. And after that, another still. Because that is what the Marianas have become. A machine that doesn't sleep. A hammer that doesn't stop. A door directly into Japan's heartland. Morgan adjusts his course, voice steady in the intercom. Good work today, boys. Let's bring her home. The engines drone in smooth harmony, pulling the aircraft eastward over the glittering Pacific. Behind them, Tokyo burns. Ahead of them, the next raid is already being planned. January 1945, Imperial General Headquarters, Tokyo. The winter light filters weakly through the dusty windows of the command room. Outside, the city groans under the weight of fire and smoke that seems to have become permanent. Sirens wail intermittently, echoing against stone walls and hollowed-out buildings. Families scurry through debris-strewn streets. The hum of distant engines, American bombers returning or on their way, never ceases. Inside, the generals hunch over tables, maps, and intelligence reports. Every new message adds another layer of dread. Lieutenant Colonel Nakamura stands at the front, exhausted, his fingers tracing routes on a map already cluttered with red and yellow pins. "Sir," he begins, voice quiet but firm, "the U.S. is now capable of launching continuous B-29 raids from Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. Our fighters cannot reach their altitude. Anti-aircraft batteries are insufficient. Fuel, ammunition, and pilot reserves are depleted faster than we can replace them. Industrial losses are compounding daily." The silence that follows is heavy, suffocating. Every officer present understands the implications. Japan's once mighty war machine has been reduced to fragile defenses, vulnerable not to land invasions, but to sustained aerial bombardment from a place they once believed distant, irrelevant, and logistically impossible. General Takeuchi finally speaks, voice low and shaking. "We planned for months. We thought Saipan would take longer. We believed the Americans could not sustain long-range operations. But they were faster. Smarter. Relentless. And now, we are defenseless." An assistant officer mutters under his breath, "We underestimated them, completely." Takeuchi nods grimly. Completely. The Marianas have become a launching point for devastation. They have rewritten the rules of this war overnight. Meanwhile, Saipan and Tinian, U.S. airfields. The morning sun catches the gleaming aluminum of hundreds of B-29s parked on the runways. Ground crews move like synchronized clockwork, refueling, rearming, and inspecting. Engineers oversee ongoing construction, hangars extended, fuel depots expanded, new taxiways graded. The islands are alive, buzzing with activity 24 hours a day. Major Morgan steps onto the edge of a runway, watching the formation of bombers taxi into position. The roar of engines and the scent of fuel fills the air. There is no hesitation, no faltering, only a steady, deliberate preparation for the next strike. Lieutenant Barrett, scanning the horizon, says quietly, "They'll never know when we'll hit next. They can't predict it. They can't stop it." Morgan nods. That's the point. The Marianas aren't just islands, they're a statement. The Americans now have reach. And they can hit anywhere Japan values most. Every factory, every rail yard, every military depot is vulnerable. He looks back at the endless rows of bombers, engines ticking as they cool. Each one represents a decision, a mission, a strike that Japan cannot defend against. Above them, the Pacific stretches endlessly, blue and calm. Below, islands of fire mark Tokyo and other cities. Between them, nothing but air, aircraft, and the weight of inevitability. Tokyo, late evening. Inside a small bunker beneath the Imperial Palace, Nakamura and a handful of staff officers review the day's reports. Fires continue to rage, infrastructure crumbles, and each report brings worse news than the last. One officer, voice trembling, asks, "How can they sustain this? How can they maintain such a tempo?" Nakamura looks at the map of the Marianas, now dotted with more pins marking new runways and fuel storage facilities. "They don't sleep," he says. "Their industry, their logistics, their planning, it all flows through these islands. They can replace losses faster than we can inflict them. They can strike whenever they choose. The B-29s will not stop. And neither will they wait for us to recover." The room falls silent. Outside, distant explosions rattle the earth. Smoke and flame tint the horizon red. The realization hits them all at once, the war has changed. It is no longer a conflict fought on distant battlefields, islands, or contested seas. The enemy is already inside their skies, striking at the heart of Japan with a power they cannot counter. Lieutenant Colonel Nakamura exhales slowly. The Marianas, they are the gateway. And we are trapped behind it. General Takeuchi rests his head in his hands. The war, it's no longer ours to control. The sounds of Tokyo burning outside are constant now, a reminder that intelligence failures, logistical underestimation, and the rapid American advance in the Marianas have delivered Japan into a new era of devastation. For the Japanese commanders, the truth is unavoidable: the war is no longer a distant threat. It has arrived, unrelenting, unstoppable, and permanent. January 1945, Saipan and Tinian airfields. The morning sun rises slowly over coral and jungle, turning the vast airfields golden. B-29s line the runways like a metallic forest. Engines hum in preparation for the day's missions. Fuel trucks snake between bombers, distributing thousands of gallons of high-octane aviation fuel. Mechanics dash across tarmacs, checking hydraulics, spark plugs, and oxygen systems with precise, practiced movements. Major Robert Morgan walks along the edge of a runway, clipboard in hand, observing the organized chaos. Every man knows the stakes. Every plane represents a direct strike on Japan. Every strike is proof of American ingenuity and relentless execution. Ground Crew Chief Master Sergeant Paul Grimes calls out to him, wiping grease from his hands. "All set, sir. Load crews are ready. Engines all checked." Morgan nods, scanning the horizon where other B-29s are taking off in formation, engines roaring like thunder over the coral. "Let's keep them moving. Every hour counts," Morgan says. "The sooner we get these planes back in the air, the more pressure we put on Japan." Above the Pacific, squadrons of B-29 soar over the endless blue. Their pressurized cabins shield crews from the bitter cold and thin air. Radar operators plot the course to the Japanese mainland while bombardiers make final adjustments. Pilots glance down at the Pacific stretching endlessly beneath them, but their minds are focused entirely on Tokyo and other industrial targets. Captain Dorsey, in the bombardier's seat, adjusts his Norden sight. Targets in sight. Bombs away in 60 seconds. Below, Tokyo is still recovering from the previous waves. Fires smolder in industrial districts. Train lines are paralyzed. Factories are silent. Civilians scramble through damaged neighborhoods. The city is no longer merely a capital, it is the target, a symbol, and a strategic prize simultaneously. The bombs drop. Explosions erupt in precise patterns, followed by secondary fires. Smoke spirals upward into the winter sky. Even at 30,000 feet, the crews can see the devastation. The scale of destruction is staggering, and Japan has no ability to respond effectively. Tokyo, command response. In the Imperial General Headquarters, officers huddle over reports. The map of Japan is now dominated by red and yellow pins representing bombing runs and damage assessments. Lieutenant Colonel Nakamura moves from table to table, trying to communicate the reality of the situation to his exhausted staff. "The Americans have achieved what we considered impossible," Nakamura says quietly. "They have built, armed, and maintained air bases capable of continuous, heavy bomber operations. They strike daily. And they will continue to do so until Japan collapses or surrenders." General Takeuchi nods slowly. His face is pale, eyes fixed on the horizon map. "Our cities, our industry, our people, we are exposed beyond anything we imagined." The room falls silent, as the distant rumble of bombs echoes in the background. Japan's strategic planners realize the unimaginable: the Marianas are no longer islands. They are unstoppable springboards for airpower, gateways that place the homeland at the mercy of sustained aerial bombardment. Back on Saipan, Major Morgan watches a B-29 taxi past, its engines purring. Behind it, cranes lift prefabricated steel for new hangars. Bulldozers level coral for additional taxiways. Fuel tanks rise like sentinels, ready to keep the bombers flying. He turns to Sergeant Barrett. "Every day we operate from here, we're reminding them that distance is no defense. Nothing they can do will stop the planes from coming." Barrett nods. They thought Saipan was secure. They thought Tinian would be months away from operational status. They never imagined we could do this in weeks. Morgan smiles grimly. "We didn't just do it. We built a launching pad for a new kind of war. A war they cannot escape. The hum of engines rises again as another formation taxis to the runway. The day is just beginning, but the rhythm is relentless. Takeoffs, strikes, returns, a cycle that Japan can only endure, not interrupt. For the men on the ground and in the air, the magnitude of what they have achieved is clear. The Marianas are no longer remote Pacific islands. They are the gateway to Japan. And America will use them every single day. February 1945, Tokyo and the Marianas. The winter sky over Tokyo is thick with smoke, the horizon a permanent orange glow from countless fires. Civilians move cautiously through streets scarred by destruction. Factories that once powered Japan's military output lie in ruins. Rail lines, bridges, and warehouses are crippled. The city's pulse slows, measured only by the distant hum of bombers in the sky. In a reinforced bunker beneath the Imperial General Headquarters, Japanese commanders sit in exhausted silence. Maps and intelligence reports litter the tables, but the numbers mean little anymore. The scale of American airpower, the sheer relentless capability of the B-29s launching from Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, has reshaped the entire strategic landscape. General Takeuchi speaks quietly, his voice weighted with resignation. We thought distance would protect us. We thought Saipan would remain just another island, too far for sustained operations. We were wrong. The Americans have turned these islands into an unstoppable bridge to our homeland. And there is no counter. Lieutenant Colonel Nakamura nods. It is no longer a question of defense. It is a question of survival. Every raid brings us closer to collapse. Outside the bunker, the faint roar of another approaching formation of B-29s can be heard. Each echo is a reminder of the new reality. Japan is no longer fighting a distant war. The war has arrived on its doorstep, brought by the logistics, planning, and sheer industrial power of the United States. Meanwhile, on Saipan and Tinian, Major Robert Morgan stands on the runway as another formation of B-29s lifts off into the pale morning sky. Engines roar, propellers slice the humid air, and the planes climb in unbroken lines toward Japan. Morgan watches silently. Every mission reinforces a new truth. The Marianas are no longer just strategic islands, they are the linchpin of an air campaign capable of changing the course of the war. Supply, planning, and technology combine here in a way that Japanese intelligence had not anticipated, had not believed possible. He turns to Sergeant Barrett, who is already checking the next bomber's systems. This is what changes everything, Morgan says. Once they saw the Marianas fully operational, Japan realized too late that the balance had shifted. From here, we can strike anywhere. Barrett nods. And they can't stop us. Not from here. Not now. The capture of Saipan, Tinian, and Guam was more than a tactical victory. It was a strategic revelation. For Japanese commanders, the realization came like a thunderclap. The United States could sustain continuous bombing raids across the Pacific, hitting industrial centers and cities with unrelenting force. The Marianas became a launching pad for an air campaign that Japan had neither anticipated nor could resist. The B-29, combined with American logistical mastery, turned distance into irrelevance, technological innovation into unstoppable power, and intelligence failures into a rapidly collapsing strategic reality for Japan. From Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, the war changed forever. What had once seemed impossible, the nonstop aerial bombardment of the Japanese homeland, was now a terrifying reality. Japan would never again view its defenses or its strategic assumptions as sufficient. The Marianas had delivered a harsh, unyielding truth: the balance of air power in the Pacific had irrevocably shifted, and the war would never be the same.